Good afternoon and welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 14th, 2020, and we have quite a few things on our agenda today, so let's go ahead and get started. Kim, are we missing anyone?
I have everybody accounted for except for Councilmember Core.
Okay. Moving on to the approval of the agenda, are there any changes from council or staff?
None from staff this afternoon.
All right, so if everyone is okay, we will move forward with the agenda as we have it here. So moving on to department presentations, the first presentation we have is from Haley Bonsteel, and it is on the Targeted Residential Investment Program Resolution of Intent. So Haley, take it away.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. I don't have any slides this afternoon. We've all been looking at screens a lot, so if you have a window nearby, feel free to look out while I speak. We had a workshop item on the Targeted Residential Investment Program proposal somewhere between a few weeks and a few lifetimes ago. And what we have under consideration today is the establishment of an urban center identification. And that's one of the important steps in the process to getting this program adopted. So I'm going to walk you through what that means and where we've gone since the workshop, as well as give an overview of the program. So, like many land use things, establishing this program requires, for some reason, a two-step process regarding the mapping aspect. So, establishing the urban center identification is the first step of two, and the second would be to actually designate areas as residential targeted areas for the purposes of the program. So in terms of the process, we would be looking to have May 19th be the date for a public hearing to consider that actual designation, as well as the actually adopt the program. But what would be moved today and next week would be to do that first step of just establishing the urban centers. So I want to talk about what those boundaries look like and why, and then talk about the actual proposal itself. So for Midway, as you know, we're considering two areas, Midway sub-area and the greater downtown for this program. And the Midway sub-area is essentially the boundaries that were identified in the Midway sub-area plan, which are the city limits on the west side of the city between Willis 516 and 272nd. And we used the eastern border of I-5, including actually shaving off a little piece to the northeast of I-5 and 516, which was considered as part of the Midway sub-area plan, although it's quite distinct in its characteristics. So just to let you know, the explanation behind that is, I think it was probably included in the Midway sub-area plan because it needed some thinking and wanted to, make sure that we took the time to give some thought to that area. But that said, the development likelihood, development characteristics, parcel shape, size, availability of transit, all those things are really different for the area northeast of I-5 and 516. So essentially, the Midway sub-area encompasses everything from the sub-area plan, less that one section. Now, for greater downtown, we took the boundaries of the downtown sub-area action plan study that was done and extended those along Meeker Street to any residential district along Meeker Street. And that's, of course, because of the Meet Me on Meeker project and the extension of the downtown design guidelines along that street. So basically looking at all of our adopted policies since the downtown sub-area action plan was completed, those boundaries reflect that latest thinking. So those are the two areas that we're looking at for the proposal. So let's talk about the proposal. So the proposal is finally in draft ordinance form in your packet. So we discussed the details of this at the workshop, and now we've gone ahead and created an actual ordinance for you to see. So while we're not really making any action on that today or next week, you can absolutely feel free to review how we've laid out the proposal in ordinance form to let me know if you have any questions or changes that you'd like to see. one change, the major change that we made based on my understanding of the feedback that council gave at that workshop was to remove the concept of a waiver for the transportation impact fees. I heard loud and clear that council was not interested in that, and that's absolutely fine. So that is not included here. All of the details of how we're going to move forward with some of the concepts that I presented at the workshop are in here. So take a look at those and see if you have any concerns. The ordinance lays out, I'll just briefly touch on the details of the proposal. It lays out an 8-year exemption on improvements to land within the residential targeted areas for multifamily residential projects. Now for Midway, we also have a 12-year exemption if 20% of the units are affordable to those making 30% area median income or below. And in the greater downtown area, there's a 12-year exemption option if units are ownership only. So that would be condos or townhomes that are owned. And if those are affordable to those making 100 to 120% area median income, which of course is reflective of the fact that we live in such a high cost area. And both of those 12-year options were, as I discussed at the workshop, heavily based on adopted policy analysis and taking a look at the outreach that was done during the sub-area planning processes for both downtown and Midway to see what would be the most appropriate kind of residential to add into the mix. So the primary reason for doing this program, of course, is that for one thing, virtually every other city has this on the books, and us not having it amounts to a fee that is going to disincentivize development. And what essentially you're doing both tonight and next week would be to say, there is insufficient housing options available in our urban centers to meet adopted goals, and specifically to meet growth targets and growth goals as part of Growth Management Act. And so we do believe that that is true. And it's also key to the city's economic development strategy is attracting that growth. So not having this program on the books greatly reduces the city's ability to move forward in its economic development strategy. Now, I did send just this morning, and I apologize I couldn't get it to you any earlier, but we've had a lot on our plates here in economic community development, a memo regarding the financial profitability analysis. And so this was a request from council at that workshop. And the memo, of course, it's not an easy answer. And I certainly learned a lot from my colleagues, Bill Ellis, who primarily wrote the memo. But essentially, the question of whether development would happen or not without the program is something that was explored in a study, and the answer was very unclear, and that's statewide. Now, in terms of the actual quantification of the benefit of the program to developers or the city, there are so many factors that go into the development or the real estate process that it's pretty difficult to compare. It would be very easy to dispute any number in a pro forma, essentially. And so what the memo kind of lays out is the line of thinking, which essentially says that, and this is verified as well, that that the incentive is used to offset greater density and or greater quality of development. That can be proven more clearly than it can be proven that, for instance, a building would not have happened without the incentive. It's very difficult to prove whether or not something would have happened in a different scenario. So I hope that that information is helpful to council as they ponder this program. Like I said, this afternoon, we're not asking you to make a final decision about the program, and I look forward to continued conversations about that between now and May 19th, if desired, and potentially further if we need to take more time with it. But the action for moving forward for next week would be to set the public hearing on this program for May 19th and to lay out those urban centers so that on May 19th, we can also designate the residential targeted areas of Midway and downtown. So I think that that's about what I wanted to cover, but I know that I covered a lot more at that workshop, and that's been a while and a lot's been going on. So if anyone has questions about the program generally, or how it's looking in the ordinance, I'm happy to take those. And yeah, I think with that, I'll turn it back over.
All right, so any questions or any comments for Haley?
Madam Chair, I do have a question for Haley.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Haley, first of all, I'm a big advocate for this program. I think it's something that we definitely need to do in order to get where we want to go, right? So we have to make an investment for a long-term investment, right? I understand why we would do a 12-year with the Midway area. I'm trying to get my arms around why would we do a 12-year downtown versus an 8-year. So maybe you can help me understand that.
Sure. So, and just to be clear, both areas have an 8-year option.
I understand. Yeah.
Okay. So in downtown, the 12-year option we thought would be helpful, partly because what we saw in the downtown Severia plan was a real need for ownership only options. And that's a type of product that's very unlikely to get developed. As you know, condos don't just spring up all around. It tends to be rentals. And so we thought that especially if we made it between 100 and 120% of the area median income, which really focuses on those folks who do have discretionary income available to support our local downtown businesses, that would be a way to accomplish, or at least make more available to accomplish. Certainly we can't accomplish this ourselves, but make it more possible for the development community to develop a type of housing that we just haven't seen, don't tend to see, and it was identified as being something that would really help the vitality of downtown through that downtown Severia action plan process.
Okay, that makes sense. And maybe I don't know, Derek, somebody, I think we got two, right? Dwell, and then also the project down by the golf course. So the Dwell took the multifamily tax exemption too, right? And I'm just curious, where we at year what with that? Do you know?
Yes, I can answer that.
Okay.
So Dwell, it looks like it was 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, well, let's see. It looks like in 2021 is when we will begin.
Okay.
Nope, I'm sorry. 2025 is when we will begin collecting tax on the improvements. So that means that that doesn't quite track for me. There's a table on page. Well, and there's no page numbers. Let's see. On the second page of the profitability memo that I sent around, there's a table that shows the estimated financial benefit to the Dwell. So I'm sorry, I thought I knew the answer because it would be in that table, but I guess the table starts at 2015. So my thought is that it must be somewhere in there. But
Okay.
I'm thinking that we didn't, that was under construction and it wasn't completed for another year or two.
Okay. Oh, so the table, okay, let's talk about when the tax collect up to 2028. Okay, okay. All right. Thank you. And like I say, I think this is a good thing for the city. I know a lot of people, we receive email from Bill Shore saying that, why would we do this here? But I just think, if everybody's doing it around us, and as our mayor said, we're not at the table, we're going to get left out, right? So I just think this is a good investment and something that we definitely need to consider as we move forward. Just one other question real quick. How will a public hearing work in, you say, how would that work May 19th if we are still where we at today? Do anybody know that?
So this is Eric. I'll jump in on that. We're still looking at our options, but what we'll probably do is encourage people strongly to provide their comments in writing, and we'll share that with the council. If somebody wants to speak to the council, we'll probably ask them to contact the city clerk's office, and then we'll either give them a link to the meeting or ask for their phone number and place an outbound call to them in a predetermined order. So it'll be some variant of that.
Okay. Thanks, Derek. And also thanks, Haley. Good job as usual.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, this was a previous program that we utilized until it expired at the end of June 2019, correct? That's where we're talking about the Dwell and the platform.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Councilmember Fincher, do you have a comment or a question? Kim, does she need to be unmuted or? All right, does anybody else have any questions or comments for Haley? All right, so is everyone okay moving this to the council meeting next Tuesday? Brenda, did you have a question?
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I had that's okay. I had a comment about the 12-year having the 20% or having the numbers in there. I think that's good because of the mixed income, and we know that even though we want the high, we still have a lot of people who can't afford. So it's not going to the low income who most likely wouldn't be able to afford to support the income, but it's still bringing in those middle income people who would otherwise be left out. I have a question about the map for the, looks like over by 167 and what is that? I guess north of Cloudy. Looks like part of that area is not included in the map. Why is that?
So, of course, I just closed it before answering, but the Downtown Severia Action Plan boundaries are what we followed. So we didn't really feel like we could analyze further areas. Why that was the boundary at the time of the Downtown Severia Action Plan, I can't answer off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, and then the Midway plan for the 8-year, is that one also home ownership?
So no, in Midway, the 8-year is the regular market rate, no, nothing special. And the 12-year is where we have the 20% affordability for 30 AMI or, and again, that's based on the Midway Severia plan, really didn't have any mention of ownership or condos. Really the conversation around there was more around affordability. So the number that we're proposing here is based on the number of existing mobile home park unit that we're estimating based on aerial imagery, because it really preservation of existing affordability was more the policy direction laid out in Midway Severia plan. So that's why we went with that route for the 12-year in Midway.
Okay, so speaking just for myself, I would like to see some affordability into the 8-year also. Is there some rule that we can't do that, or why did you not do that in the 8-year plan?
The way that the law is laid out is that, I mean, we can do almost anything. For one thing, the law is somewhat broad. The 8-year and the 12-year are identified in state law as, 8-year can be no matter what, and 12-year, to get the 12-year, you must have these levels of affordability. So, I think there's an argument to be made that affordability is needed. I mean, certainly affordability is needed in Midway. I think that the ability to get market rate projects in Midway is a little bit unknown. We've seen the development community rally around transit-oriented development throughout the region, but it's been still pretty close in to Seattle. And so I think that as we see these light rail stations get developed farther and farther from Seattle, there's a question of whether the development community will see them as strong enough to support market rate. And so I think that's why we're going with the kind of the way that state law kind of lays it out for the 8 and 12. But that's sort of based on the best available information, which admittedly there just isn't that much of.
Okay, thank you, Haley. I would still want to see for even the 8-year plan, it doesn't have to be the 20% like in the 12-year plan, but I think we should put some sort of percentage in there. And my final question was, do we know that we did not get any projects because of not having this? I realize it hasn't been a year yet that it's been expired, but do we know that there were any projects that we didn't get it because we didn't have people coming in to take advantage of it? Not very many, at least.
Right. We don't know. And that was a little bit of what we got at in that profitability analysis memo, is just that it's very difficult to quantify what doesn't happen because of not having something. So, we don't have developers who are knocking down our doors and submitting applications and then finding out we don't have it and going away. That would be the most obvious way to track that. However, the way I think about it is that, development community is pretty savvy, and they're going to look and see that we let it expire and not even call us up. So my concern since we've let it expire has been, how much development are we missing out on that we don't even know about? And unfortunately, we just don't have a good way, to report that kind of interest that comes and goes. I will tell you that in speaking with Sound Transit's transit-oriented development, they were very concerned about the ability to get a quality project on the surplus property without MFTE, because they, are very close. They have a close understanding of the development process, and they understood the importance of that incentive to the development community. So they were one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that this was in place sooner rather than later, so that we could signal to the development community a readiness and a willingness at that light rail station, to get that development done.
Okay, it was in place until last June,
Yes.
July. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Well, and I think one of the things to point out too is what's really important in this is it gives us the ability to make this area what we want it to be. And we keep talking about that. We always talk about having those tools in our back pocket that allow us to do those things. And I think that's what's really important about moving forward with this. Councilmember Thomas, I see you've been unmuted. Did you have something?
Yes, thanks. Haley, good job on this. The biggest problem I had, and I was talking to Tony about this week, is, and I don't have a problem with the downtown, like you've done with Dwell and the stuff in the past, provide these incentives. But I am having a problem up in the Midway sub areas, and these are strictly for multi-unit dwellings to provide this incentive.
Yes.
Is that correct? No. So we're not talking any retail at all here.
No.
I just think that I guess you've already kind of with answering Councilmember Fincher's question. You kind of said, well, we're not sure what it would be because we don't have much to go on, and I guess that's the problem, that we don't have much to go on, and it seems like we should allow the market forces to determine that. And I guess what Tony was trying to explain to me was that, well, yeah, we don't have the tools, or this will give us the tools to help put in what we want. But we already have a lot of tools at our disposal too, landscaping and different kind of things, in our ordinances that won't allow, junky stuff to get in there. I don't know. I'm just a little worried about the sub area one. And I don't have a problem with the Meeker Street. I like the way you've done that all the way down. And to answer, what was the question? Oh, I know Brenda had a question in regard to the up on Cloudy Street. Yeah, that was done by a different group a long time ago, and that was the way they designed it to end it there on Cloudy instead of going more north, which is odd. We thought at the time too, but that's the way it was. So I don't know if you can answer my question or concern, but I was just telling Tony about it this week that I just think that maybe the natural forces of the marketplace will determine, what will go in there. Does that make sense?
I just, I don't know if this will, be a complete response, but just for something to think about with regards to what you just brought up. I think that while we can wait and see, we have historically seen that development in Kent has not happened remotely as quickly as our plans have anticipated. And we have needed to have a heavy hand in assisting development sort of to come here. So even the platform, which didn't utilize this program, did have a major city role in that we owned the land, of course. So
right.
regards to Midway, you know, while there are unknowns, I'll say that the risk from my perspective of not having this on the books is that whatever the market does decide is acceptable for the Midway sub area will then be stuck with that, you know, for potentially a very long time. And I see Midway around that new light rail as having a lot of opportunity to create, you know, essentially a new neighborhood where there's very little residential today. And I guess from my perspective, the risk that something is built that doesn't meet, you know, the kind of quality and standards that we would like for new development, and specifically the density, because that's really where that cost can come in and where the incentive can play a role. I think that, you know, that would be a bit of a shame. So that's just something I want to think about. But I hear your.
Well, I just think that the location of that particular area between Seattle and Tacoma, you're right by Highline College, is very, very desirable, to say the least, because what you're going to see is a whole bunch of residences like up at Green River College, for example. A lot of those kind of apartments or condos are going in, and that's probably what it's going to end up looking a lot like. Plus, you're going to have retail like your Subway and Starbucks, etc.
Right. Just a reminder that all of the neighboring cities there have this program in place. So, for instance, you know, Seattle, Tukwila, I mean, they have this program. So it's hard to say that we would get the same kind of development without that program.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Go ahead, Bill. I'd like to hear you.
Madam President, I just want to make a comment. You know, we often talk about, you know, when we look at stuff, well, what other cities are doing around us, right? You know, that's one of the first question that we ask, right? So to me, I think it makes sense for us as a council. You know, we can't wait till the party to start and then jump in. I mean, it makes sense to me, and I know a lot of builders in the past did look at this here. And if our neighbor city is offering this here, I mean, why would we not offer this here? I mean, it's best to have something and be able to get something in the long run versus getting nothing at all. And I think to me, I think the reverse. I mean, I understand both Midway and downtown less, but I would say Midway probably more important to me than downtown. But they both is just as important. So I just hope we as council think about, you know, we need to look long term, and we make the decision. We look at long term decision, what's best for the city, not what we're looking at today. I just think to me, you know, we want to be ready when this market turn and be able to have the programs that be able to incentivize the builders to come. I mean, keep in mind now, all the other cities around us already have this on their books. So I just find it hard. Why will we as Kent, you know, why would we not want to encourage this type of development in this city? It's just something to think about.
No, I understand, and you want to be competitive, like you say. I guess what I'm thinking about is that no other city has what we have to offer. I mean, we've got a certain amount of space that's available, and now with the light rail going in, and I'm just having a hard time here on the sub area up there. And I've been working on that sub area for what, 15, 16 years, when Gloria was doing all that work up there and designing and all that stuff. I don't know. So I'm open. You know, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I may be the lone ranger here, but we'll see.
If you don't mind.
Obviously, like you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Tony.
Well, I was just going to say, we have a couple other council members that have some comments. I don't know if maybe
Oh,
that
good.
as well. So
Okay, good.
if you don't mind, let's move on to Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, so my question was a follow-up sort of to Brenda's comment. So my question to Haley is, on the 8-year exemption, do any of our neighboring cities have an affordability component to their 8-year program?
I can find that out quite quickly, but not immediately off the top of my head.
Okay, I'd just be curious before we would think about introducing an affordability component to the 8-year. I'd want to know what that would do to our competitiveness.
Right.
With neighboring programs.
Bring that up.
All right, Councilmember Michaud, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Council President. To go along with what everyone else is talking about is what neighboring cities are doing. I think you shared with us, Haley, before at the workshop, what specifically other cities are doing. And so if you could send that info to us again, I think that would be helpful. And then specifically, do you know if Renton Landing was built using, if Renton had this tax exemption when that was built?
I don't know about that specific project, but I do have up my kind of cheat sheet of all of our neighbors, or most of our neighbors, and what they have on the books. So Renton does have both an 8 and a 12-year option on the books. And so we can find out if that specific project utilized it. Let me just make a note to do that.
And then is this really the only tool we have to incentivize builders?
Great question. And I'll tell you, I felt very vindicated when I read in a study recently that Washington State has the fewest incentives of any state in the country. So yeah, we have about one other one, and you all are not going to like it. It's to waive impact fees. That, and actually it's not exactly clear how legal that is, but some other cities do it. So, there are much more abstract ways that we can incentivize development. And I think an example of that would be Meeker Street. So one could argue that the reason that the Midtown or 64th and Meeker project moved forward is that we did incentivize it through our investment in Meeker Street. I think that project would certainly not have happened if it were not for the city's investment in the planning and, piece by piece here, the construction of the Meet Me on Meeker project. So in terms of, what else we can do, what we can do is to signal to the development community in as many ways as possible what we are looking for. We can make zoning, more or less burdensome. Those are all more indirect and abstract ways, and they really aren't incentives so much as how many barriers can we live without. It's sort of a triple negative situation. But in terms of actual incentive programs, there is just absolutely very, very little that we can legally do in this state. And just to go back for a moment to Marley's question, I do have up what all the cities have, but I can't see at the moment which of them have. Okay, I see Woodinville has an 8-year that does require affordability or historic preservation. So there's one example of someone that is one city that has utilized the option to make the 8-year more affordable. But I'll say the vast majority do not, and that tracks with, I think, just the way that state law lays out those 8 and 12 years. Is, it kind of just demarcates, not that you couldn't do something different, but it demarcates the 8-year as market rate and the 12-year as affordable. So I'm sorry, Councilmember Michaud, to take up your question answer time with that one, but I just wanted to touch back on that.
No worries. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you,
Councilmember
Haley.
Fincher, do you have a follow-up question?
I'm sorry, did you call on me, Brenda? Hello?
Tony, who'd you call on?
Hello?
Brenda, Councilmember Fincher, you still have your hand up. Did you have another question?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment that even though other cities may not be doing the 8-year plan with any sort of exemption, not exemptions, any sort of aid for the low income, I still think that's important for us, looking at the market, looking at our proximity to Seattle. We know that they have a lot of people who have moved from that end down to Kent, and we know that we've also had a number of people who have had to leave Kent and move even further south because of affordability. I'm not talking about it being 20%, but I think that it still should be 5%, 10%, that we should come up with a number and put in the 8-year plan, so that, because they're getting something, definitely getting something for that, with not having to pay for 8 years on the improvements to the property. And I don't think it's too much to ask that for the residents who are living there, it would then be more of a mix, even though low barrier mixed income, because it's not very many units, it's still going to help out some of the people on the Hill and in Kent.
Councilmember Core, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a comment. I agree with Councilmember Fincher that we do need to have some percentage for mixed use. We need to make sure that individuals who are in 30% AMI or lower do have a space in these buildings. But my other question, Haley, is are we able to, or in our permitting process, are we able to put something in there that these developers are using our local labor or a percentage of local labor when we're giving them these tax exemptions?
Yes, that is an option, and some cities do stipulate that. One thing that is a little bit challenging about that is just how do we kind of request documentation of that and approve that, because we don't, that's sort of a research area for us. But I can explore the practicality of that with some of our permitting staff and find out what they would need to know to be able to verify that information if you'd like.
Please, that would be great. Thank you.
Madam President, I don't know how to raise my hand. How did you raise your hand? I do have a comment I want to make. Madam President.
Bill, are you on your, if you're on your phone, you go into the participants panel
Yep.
and touch your name, and then you should have an option.
All right, Councilmember Larmer's ahead of you really quickly. We'll hear from her and then we'll follow up with you, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, so I just, so my other question was, if we have an affordability component in the 8-year, I guess I'm a little confused. So if we have an affordability component in the 8-year, would we not have an affordability? Will we get rid of that 12-year? I'm just trying to understand, like, how does that work with programs that have affordability at both level? Do you?
So Woodinville didn't have a 12-year program at all. They only had an 8-year. So this program is flexible. And so, you could have an 8-year with a certain level of affordability and a 12-year at a different level of affordability. There are floors, essentially, there are minimums for that 12-year because that's the one that's laid out in state law. And that, that kind of informs, I think, where people set their numbers. But it's really up to all of you folks and the mayor's office to determine what kind of combination of numbers years works for you. Like I said, I crafted the proposal based on the adopted policy direction, and that is something I stand behind because that market rate product, I think does contribute to the Kent's overall housing diversity and housing stock. And so I would continue to propose a market rate option. However, there is absolutely an option to introduce affordability at 8 and 12 at different levels, to remove the 12 and only have affordability at 8. There's a lot of ability to maneuver within that. Wait, I want to make sure. Is it true that you can? I'm gonna have to maybe look into this just a little bit. No, yeah. I'm sorry. I just second guessed myself for a minute, but it gets confusing because of the sort of minimums and maximums. But yeah, it is possible to dial either of them. The 12-year has a minimum percentage and minimum affordability level, so you couldn't do like 12-year at 5% affordable AMI. I don't remember off the top of my head what those thresholds are, but there are more requirements on the 12 in terms of state law. 8-year, it's up to us.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember Larmer?
It does, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. I get a couple of things, Haley. One is I recall that chart that you show at our working session. We look about affordable. I thought we was pretty locked in with the metrics for us looking at affordable. I remember the chart that you showed, so you can validate that, number one. And my second question is just I'm just not sure we're not all on the same page with this here. Let's say if we don't do anything, and not to do this here, what would our development look like in these places? Will we have any say so, or maybe you can expand on that place.
Sure. I think development would come slower. That's for darn sure. I think that right now there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy, but fundamentally, I think that most builders are champing at the bit to continue developing, and there continues to be a housing crisis in the Puget Sound. So I think that we'll see our neighbors get a lot of that multifamily development, and we won't get it as much. I think that the density would be lower, and the exact quantification of that is difficult. But the other thing is that the quality of the products is also something that they're likely to put that money into, and that we could pretend that that's altruistic, but it's really about what return they can get. So I think that you would, you wouldn't instantly be able to see the difference between two buildings built necessarily. The real difference would be whether the one happens at all and how many years later it happens. So, it's possible they would be taller or denser. Either way, we have design guidelines for both of these areas. So of course there's going to be a floor on that. But I think it's likely that there are little details about quality and density that could be changed. And it's really just the timing of whether development comes here. I think it's very possible that development would completely skip us over until our land costs have gone up enough. And whether those land costs will go up enough is, that's part of our economic development strategy. It's possible that our land costs would not develop or would not go up because we would not be seen as desirable, because we would have a lot of somewhat vacant areas. Just a reminder that the original progenitors of this bill were concerned about, the idea of sort of vacant urban centers. And you do see this a little bit in downtown. I mean, imagine downtown without dwell and platform. Now they seem, like crucial projects, but without, residential growth, you tend to see more open spaces that are not well monitored by the public. There aren't a lot of people. The businesses suffer. The ability to, keep entertainment options or other things alive just goes way down. So I would say that would be my concern, not having this on the book.
And what about the other question about the
Yeah, I
chart
could
show
you
about affordable?
I didn't quite understand the question.
I thought though our session, you had a chart that showed what is needed and this will be affordable houses. I thought there was a good spike and you looked at had a great affordable houses here in Kent. You recall showing that chart?
Are you
Yeah,
talking about the stock that we talked about at the retreat?
Yeah.
That really good slideshow that you presented. I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, so that essentially, and I can try to bring it up and share my screen. I don't know how easy that's going to be, but I can attempt it. Essentially, sure, because of our land prices and construction costs and our position in the region, we have more housing available to those in the middle spectrums of the income, middle part of the income spectrum rather, than we do at the upper and lower end. So many cities don't meet the amount of housing needed for the lower end because it's very expensive to operate housing meeting the needs of those at the lower end. But we also have an issue with rising incomes in the Kent Valley and very little housing stock that kind of meets the standard 30% affordability threshold. So that is what that graph showed, if that's what you
Yeah, that is what I'm referring to. Maybe it might be nice to resend it out so we as council take a look at that. And I guess my last comment, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but and Madam Chair, I believe it's up to you. I mean, there are pros and cons in what we do, right? I mean, I don't know, Haley, you are the subject matter expert, and I mean, I think it may be nice just kind of show a little small draft on the pros and cons of this here. I mean, I just think this is a huge decision that we are going to be making, looking at the future of Kent, not just tomorrow, but 10, 12 years out. And I think we need to make sure our vision is clear on what we want this city to be like. And I think any more data you can provide to help that, it would be great.
Sure, it might be full of words, but I will do my best to make it concise.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. So we talked about a lot of things so far. Everyone has great comments. I've had some concerns. So Haley, do we need to work through those concerns before we move this to council next week, or?
So, sorry to jump in there. We don't need to have these things resolved to move forward with the identification of the urban centers. So for next week, that should be fine. It's really between now and the May hearing that we want to make sure we're resolved on the details of the proposal.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, council member.
so is Haley saying that all we're going to do next week is identification of the area? That's it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Haley, we also had, I think Bill asked if you can kind of do like a pros and cons, maybe to see some comparisons. You kind of give us a few of those of what some other cities are doing with some of the low-income housing options. And then maybe bring this back to the next committee of the whole meeting to review that additional information.
Sure.
Good.
But we can go ahead, and if I have approval, is everyone okay moving this the way it is now, just moving it forward to next week at council so we can get that public hearing set for May 19th?
Yes, from Bill.
Yeah.
All right, do I have any objections from anybody about moving that forward?
I have
I'm
a
a no.
question. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Fincher.
So if we move it ahead, are we then locked into having to do something as far as the plan and not knowing what the percentages would be, or
Exactly.
No. So the only action that would be taking is saying that these are urban centers, which is just a pre-step to the actual doing of any program. So we can absolutely come back for another committee meeting to discuss some of the details of how you'd like the program to look. But this does not, the only thing that this locks in is the outermost boundaries of the possible program.
Okay, so
Okay,
Council
thank you.
President, sorry.
Go ahead, Councilmember Larmer.
I want to be really clear. The only thing that we're moving forward from today's agenda is for A and not B.
Correct.
Thank you. I will approve of that.
Okay, so do I have?
I can live with that.
Okay, so everyone is okay with moving that forward, and then Haley, you will put together some information from us. Maybe if there's something that we can look at before the committee of the whole meeting, and then we'll bring this back as an additional topic on the 28th.
Sure.
All right. Derek Matheson, do you have something to add?
I do. Thank you, President Troutner. I just wanted to point out that we've had council members propose, I think, 2 changes to the ordinance, one regarding an affordability component for the 8-year scenario, and the other involving local labor. And I just wanted to ask what information council would need from staff in order to provide some direction on April 28th, so we don't have to bring multiple versions of ordinances to that public hearing on May 19th.
Right. Thank you, Derek. I was wondering about that as well. So I think that I would like to know if there's consensus or majority on those items before moving on those.
I support this the way that it's written. I think it goes back to your presentation at our workshop where you talked about what our stock looks like, what we need for that area, and what type of housing we need, and really what we want that area to look like. There's certain things that we want to put into place, and this would be one of those options. So I support it the way that it is, but I'd like to hear Councilmember Boyce. Do you have a comment?
I support it the way it is. I don't understand the local labor. I'm a big labor advocacy, right? So I think when you build stuff, right? I mean, most local labor, they're not based out of Kent necessarily. They may be based out of Seattle, where they're Teamster, they're all over. So when you build these type things, labor have to be involved. So I'm not sure when you say local labor, I'm not sure what the heck that means. So I support it just the way it is.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. I want the percentage in there for the 8 year. It's not going to be, like I said, it's not going to be the 20% that would be in the 12 year, but I think that we need to have some component built in, 5%, 10%, because it's still going to, and to me, I'm looking at it as a mixed income unit. So the product is going to look the same. If you drive through a true mixed income unit, you have without knowing what you're looking for, you don't readily identify that one's low income, this one is high income, because the incomes are mixed in there and the neighborhood flows. So I think we can still meet the goal that we have for that area, having that small percentage added in.
Okay, Councilmember Core.
Thank you. I just want to say that this is a long-term plan that we're working at, the Vision for Kent. So the reason for having, I agree with Councilmember Fincher, having a percentage is very important. So I don't necessarily agree 100% with the way that we have the draft as is right now. And the reason for local labor is I'm just curious at what other cities are doing, how they are adding this to the ordinance to make sure that we have companies from all over the country coming into Kent building buildings. We want to make sure that they're hiring people in the region, and if not from Kent. So that's the reason I wanted to look into that. So I hope that answers the question.
I agree with that also.
Okay, Councilmember Boyce, did you still have your hand up?
No, my hands are down. I'm sorry.
All right, Councilmember Larmer.
So on the local labor, I'm wondering, so we have the program where there has to be apprenticeship opportunities for construction in Kent over $1 million. Does that apply to this like these projects as well? Is that, a component of local labor, or local opportunities?
I'm sorry, I'm unfamiliar with that program.
Councilmember Larmer, I believe that program applies just to city capital projects.
Okay. Because I think maybe applying a model like that to this as, part of the incentive, part of giving back to the community, for the waiver or the exemption we're giving you. I think I'd be more interested in something that's modeled on an existing program like that. And I'd be curious if anybody else is doing anything like that in private construction, or if that would be considered a hindrance.
So this is Haley. If I could just jump in before we continue the roll call. It sounds like there's interest in more information on the labor piece. And I can do some research rather than actually change the proposal just yet, and figure out what other cities do and what equivalent programs there are, if that is something that the majority or consensus of council would like to see.
Well, and I'm curious.
I would.
Okay, I'm curious what other cities have done, because I don't know that this is necessarily a language that has been put into an ordinance like this. So I think I agree with Councilmember Boyce, where it just is something that happens because you have local workers. So going back to that first piece, I just kind of need to know who is okay moving this forward as is. And so far I've heard from Councilmember Core and Councilmember Fincher, and then Councilmember Boyce.
This is Councilmember Larmer. I would like to get some additional information before the 28th.
Okay, but as far as, I just kind of need to know specifics. We're talking about, do you want to see that piece in there for the 8 year with,
I'd like to see some research around the local labor issue, or some sort of, apprenticeship opportunity, or just to understand a little bit more what we can get back perhaps
and
in
then are
that
you
area.
okay with the plan as far as the way it's written with the type of housing stock that we would have up there?
Yeah, I guess I'm still, I'm still a little confused as to, so we have an 8-year and a 12-year. They'd be at 2 different points. But then we'd only have a 12-year in downtown based on ownership.
Let me just restate the proposal. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, maybe that's what I need.
That would be great, Haley. Thank you.
Sure. So in downtown, you could apply for a project and 8-year, regardless of the level of affordability, or an 8-year exemption for multifamily, new or rehabilitated projects are eligible. In downtown, if you wanted to get a longer extension, like for instance 12 years, then you would be required to build ownership only, and they have to be sold at a price that is affordable to those making 100 to 120% of the area median income. In Midway, there is the exact same 8-year option currently in the proposal. So any project that comes in, it does have to be new projects. Unlike downtown, we're not looking for rehabilitation out there. New multifamily project eligible for the 8-year exemption on those improvements. If you want to get a longer exemption, that 12-year, then you must make 20% of your units affordable to those making 30% area median income or below.
Okay, and we've only been able to identify Woodinville as the only other one that has affordability at an 8-year. So if that's based on that, I'm okay with how this is written, but I would be curious if any other cities are doing anything with local labor.
Okay. Councilmember Thomas, are you okay putting this forward as it is? So I will wait for his mic to come up. Councilmember Michaud, are you okay moving this forward as it is?
I'm fine moving it forward as it is.
Okay, so waiting for Councilmember Thomas to come up, but it looks like Haley, that should give you enough information. I think a majority of us are okay moving it forward as it is.
Are you asking me? Oh,
Yeah, Councilmember Thomas, are you okay moving it forward as it is?
no.
Okay.
I don't have a problem as far as it is written right now, as far as distinguishing the 2 areas, downtown and the sub areas up there Midway. What I'm having a problem with, Madam Chairman, is that maybe I'm missing the boat here, but we have one of the most desirable pieces of land available, and I don't think you need any incentive at all. The marketplace is going to take care of it. They're going to build whether they're going to build or not. What you're going to do is, if you allow this to go on, you're going to end up with mobile home parks up there instead of multi-story apartments or condos. Because one side, you look out one way, you look east, and you get the Cascades of Mount Rainier. You look west, and you get the Olympics. I mean, gosh, guys, this is a very, very valuable piece of land we've got up there.
Well, that's what made you think there's not other cities that have valuable land. And we're not the only one that have valuable land to build on. I mean,
I go back to something my mom once said. If everybody's driving off the cliff, does that mean you want to drive off the cliff too? So if you have the most valuable land and you hang on to it for a while, yeah, maybe it'll take a little bit longer. But are we after immediate growth here? This is me talking. That's what's really funny. Because you know me, I like people. But I just don't see. I guess I'll just keep learning some more. But
This is Haley.
if you came up,
I just want to jump in because I didn't mention something when Councilmember Boyce asked me about how development would look different. And one very important thing to think about with Midway is that historically, that is a very auto-oriented area, and that is not a high value from a residential perspective area. And so when we think about the market and how long it will take for development to come or not, I also just want to bring up that the style of that development, I mentioned density, but it escaped my mind for the moment that really that it is likely that we will not see the more transit-oriented development if the development community is not recognizing the market there. So I'm not trying to influence council, just wanted to put out there that the market responds to the conditions that it sees. And part of what it sees out there today is a very auto-oriented area. So it is possible that lower quality development would continue to happen aside from delays in residential development generally. Thank you for letting me jump in there. I'll continue to be quiet now.
No, that's okay, Haley. I know what you're saying, Haley, but I would disagree that it's going to be a highly desirable residential area in spite of all the traffic. I mean, look at downtown Seattle. That's got a lot of high traffic volume, and you got lots of very nice residential areas, very expensive. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud here, you guys, so don't mind me. But as it is, if it was up to me tonight, I would vote no.
All right, well, I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Thomas. Haley, it looks like you have a majority of council members that want to move forward with this as it is. And I know we've talked about this for quite some time. I see a couple more hands up. Is there anybody else that has questions or comments on this before we move on and make sure Haley has everything she needs at this point? Councilmember
I did.
Councilmember Corr, is your hand up? Oh, Councilmember Fincher.
Hey, Haley, these are their own properties, but they don't have to be occupied by the owner. Is that correct? The owner would be able to have them as rentals also?
Yes, we don't have any stipulations about that at the moment.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Boyce.
It's my last comment. I just wish we would start comparing ourselves to Seattle. We're not Seattle. We're never going to be Seattle. And then secondly, Councilmember Thomas, when that Midway subway area came into existence, I mean, you was on the original plan to go way, way, way back, right? So we will continue to sit on this here for what? I mean, it's been years and years and years. We have not had the opportunity that we have in front of us today to be able to do something with that area. So my only concern is that, sit on it and do what? And wait for what? I think there's an opportunity here to make something happen, right? We need to seriously look at what we want that area to be like and make sure we have some type of control, that's a better word, in what we want that area to be like. Because if we don't, anything could pop up there. And I think those certain things we don't want to happen in the area. So why not us take the lead and make sure we get what we want out the particular area? So that's my last comment on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. So Haley, do you have everything then? Do you have any other things you need from us? It sounds like we can move forward and set that public hearing as well.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
All right, so it looks like you're going to continue. We're going to move on to information only on House Bill 1754.
Yes, and unfortunately, this is an even more complicated item than the last one. So I want to tell you about this bill that was passed and why you are likely to see a proposal coming out quite soon regarding homeless encampments. So House Bill 1754 essentially prohibits cities from regulating outdoor homeless encampments or indoor homeless encampments that are hosted by church organizations, except for a list. And that list has many except for kind of items in it. And so essentially what you have is the state legislature passed a bill that tried very hard to prohibit cities from sort of across the board, making it impossible for churches to host the homeless. Now, you may have varying feelings on encampments as housing solutions or harm reduction strategies, or regardless, I have complicated feelings about it. But I'll say that the bill if I can be frank, is poorly written. And the reason I say that is just that it's very unclear of what compliance exactly would look like. And so an example of that is, cities would be allowed under this bill to impose a 1,000-foot buffer on simultaneous or adjacent hostings. But we would not be able to impose a 1,500-foot buffer. Now, why 1,000 feet? Is that the right number? Is that the right number for our neighborhoods, for our lot sizes? Is that the right number for the way that these encampments operate in other places and what we learn about their impacts? One of the main issues is that it's hard to analyze all of these. It's quite a list of potential regulations that are or are not allowed, because this bill goes into effect very soon. So we have 40 to 50 churches in the city, and they own land throughout various zones. And so allowing ourselves to become subject to this bill, which would become effective in June, would mean that we would have many fewer options for how to regulate potential encampments that those churches would want to potentially either host or partner with someone else to host on their land. Now, the bill does give us an out, and the out is that if we have an ordinance on the books before the effective date of this bill, which is June 12th, I believe, we can go ahead and we can not comply with all of the many details of the regulations that they've laid out there, but we do still have to comply with a sort of broad allowance for outdoor encampments that churches want to host. So I know that's already really confusing because there's just a lot of different sections of this bill, but essentially, if we don't have an ordinance on the books that meets the broad level, we will be subject to many more detailed level requirements for what we can and cannot regulate. And I think the role of regulation for a homeless encampment is so multifaceted. We need to be thinking about protecting vulnerable people who might choose to utilize the services available by a homeless provider at one of these organizations, as well as, of course, the residential neighborhoods in which these encampments might locate. And so the ability to regulate that in a way that makes sense for Kent, given all of our many factors and all of our context, we think it's important to move forward with an ordinance that meets the broader requirements before June 12th, which is very soon from the perspective of council process. So I want to just touch briefly on what we allow today and what questions I have that I wish I had more time to answer, and then kind of the general direction we're thinking for getting an ordinance on the books before June 12th without being able to do all of the analysis we would want to do probably regarding these kinds of encampments. So today we allow emergency shelter in commercial and industrial zones without any conditions. But in residential zones, it's only in the multifamily duplex zone that we do allow shelter, and it must be indoors, and it is subject to a few other conditions as well, not just indoors. It has to be on the same lot as the facility. I can't exceed the footprint. It's essentially we're really trying to keep them in enclosed buildings. So the first thing that we know we need to do is to allow them outdoors somewhere in the city, because otherwise we will not be in compliance with this state law. Now, what's confusing is, what kind of zoning decisions will meet the description in the law for, not prohibiting religious organizations from doing this. So we know we need to do outdoor, but what's unclear is whether zoning to certain zones or not would comply with the law. And so to be pretty honest, I think that we're doing a bit of sort of risk mitigation and assessment in our approach here. And the reason I say that is, if we continue to only allow these in one residential zone, I think we have more of a likelihood of being challenged as that being out of compliance, understanding that certainly compliance is open to interpretation here. And that would, then we would have a whole court battle and whatever. And I'm sure that Pat can jump in and set me right if I've misspoken there. But what we are thinking is that it may make sense to expand the number of zones, not to everywhere in the city, because that doesn't feel like something we can properly assess right now, but to perhaps expand to other multifamily zones based on that, fundamentally, multiple people living in a smaller area is what multifamily zones were envisioned as. So it should.
Councilmember Larmer, do you have a question about?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just kind of getting in the queue for when Haley was done. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Keep going. Thank you.
So it should be noted that the way that outdoor encampments are going in Seattle is, of course, not without controversy, but even more specifically than that, most of them are, or many of them, or some of them, I'm not exactly sure, but according to our human services staff, the primary model is for them to actually be self-managed. And there's a lot of controversy about that. There's a Seattle Times article that I was reading about it. And so the city of Seattle has, really grappled with its relationship with these homeless service providers that allow the camps to be self-managed. So it just brings up so many questions about potential encampments, such as, where are they most successful? How are they best run? Is it self-managed or managed by others? What part of a broader response do they need to be a piece of to be successful? What does success mean? Is it moving people out and into permanent housing? Is it simply a reduction in the amount of litter that people see? I mean, there's just a host of issues about that. And so we cannot remotely tackle that by June 12th in a way that both meets this law and does justice to our community and gets, all of the proper input and everything. So what we are thinking right now, and there's a lot more detail here, so we can certainly talk more, but May 5th, we could have a hearing and essentially pass an ordinance that does our best attempt to meet the broader requirements of the law in a way that will hopefully, keep us immune from being subject to all of the more detailed requirements for what we can and can't regulate. And then the only good news, and it's paltry, but the good news is that we can amend that at any point. So the law does allow for an ordinance that's on the books to be amended as long as the amendments don't run afoul of those broad requirements. And the broad requirement really is just don't prohibit churches from doing this. What's so unclear is, what does prohibit mean exactly? Does that mean you can't zone them? The other big thing that I think is important about the direction that we're going is I've been reviewing the King County Public Health checklist that they require for their encampments, and it is really extensive. The amount of investment that an organization would need to do to ensure that an encampment would be, safe and orderly and clean is extremely. It's not insignificant at all. And so my proposal would probably be to, expand our zoning to be more multifamily zones so that we're not quite as at risk of contention regarding where we allow them. It would be to require a list of sensible health and safety requirements related to or directly taken from King County's public health requirements, and to basically lay out that we can amend this in the future as needed, but that for now this is our kind of we're trying to sort of thread the needle between several different really challenging viewpoints and regulations in a way that retains our ability to have a say in how these encampments or shelters pop up. Because obviously with the housing crisis, there could be interest in this. That said, it would likely need to be an organization that has experience doing this to be able to meet the list of criteria that King County Public Health does. And so I believe there is literally just one organization that does outdoor encampments in Seattle and the Puget Sound. And so, understanding more about their operations and all of that, there's some opportunity to revisit this if needed. But I hate to bring this one forward, frankly, because it's just very difficult to know how to respond to a bill that has a lot of sort of discrepancies between it and conflicts within it. And so the proposal is probably not going to feel comfortable to any of us exactly. It's going to feel uncomfortable from a variety of different perspectives. So it's really a legal exercise. And I've been working very closely with Adam Long, our assistant city attorney, to figure out how to get through this in a way that kind of mitigates our risk of challenge while still complying with what we are interpreting as the intent of the bill. So I want to make sure that Pat is available to jump in if needed, but that is what I'm here to talk about this afternoon.
Councilmember Larmer.
So actually, I think, so Haley, you ended up addressing my question, and my question was, could we amend this? Passing any legislation that we have to move quickly on and not do a thorough research makes me nervous. So I'm comforted to hear that we will have an opportunity to revisit and refine it and put a little more thought to it. Understanding that we have to move quickly given how it's coming out of Olympia. But a follow-up question, do we know, you said there's one provider in Seattle. Do we have any idea, like, will this in any city, not just Kent, but does having a religious organization host to these and manage them, does that move them out of, would that move the camp out of Mill Creek? Or is it additive, or does it shift the unsheltered residents into a new location?
So there's probably not a simple answer to that, but I'll tell you basically the only piece of information that I do know, which is that the city of Seattle, according to their metrics, is not seeing people moving into permanent housing out of these encampments. And that is one of their concerns of that they've been grappling with these encampments. So I don't know that it's possible to say definitively whether folks are moving, around between cities when encampments become sanctioned. But I do know that the city of Seattle has not found this particular homeless provider to be capable of meeting its metrics regarding moving folks out of homelessness, frankly, which, is supposed to be the goal.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fincher. I think we're waiting for Councilmember Fincher to, are you there?
Oh, thank you. I already stated my question. Haley, what I was wondering is this referring only to cars, campers, tents, or is it also the tiny homes? What exactly are they considering outdoor camping?
So the bill lists a variety of types, and that is one of our concerns, is that if we were subject to the bill, we would not be able to choose one or another type that we determine to be acceptable. So the bill lists indoor overnight shelter, temporary small house on-site, vehicle resident safe parking. It kind of goes into the various types. And one of my concerns about being subject to the new bill, if I could just take a moment to get into one little specific, is that cities could require that churches who only have just enough parking for their primary use could not do, for instance, a safe parking encampment, because then where would people park when they're trying to attend church? We have quite a few churches and single family homes who have excess parking. And so that would mean that there would be several opportunities in single family areas for, safe parking sites. And whether or not you agree with, safe parking sites as a good tool in the fight against homelessness, I think that our inability to determine where, that if single family zones are appropriate for that, that's where I feel concerned, because we do know that we have churches with excess parking in single family zones. So just to bring up a specific example, and this is what I was trying to get at with all these details, they have what you can and can't allow for these different types. And it's just, it's quite burdensome from that perspective, for different requirements that you can and can't do for the different of emergency shelter.
But even a church without excess parking, if church is during the day and the parking is at night after all of their church activities are done for the overnight camping. So yeah, I want us to be able to retain control over some of that.
Right.
So are there any other questions or comments for Haley?
Madam Chair,
Councilmember Thomas.
are you? Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Haley, this is really a can of worms, because I think it was Marley was asking whether the people would be drawn out of the Mill Creek area and come up to a church. The likelihood of that is really slim to none, probably. Most of the homeless people that I've met so far are not prone to be, drawn to a religious organization, even if it's just temporary overnight. The other thing that is interesting is that a lot of times the homeless are homeless because they don't want to be under an organized organization, even if it's their own people. So we've really got to do something to resolve this. You're right, Haley. Anything we could do to help would be, we're with you.
I think we also need to protect the rights of the churches too, though, to be able to carry out their mission.
Well, that'd be up to the individual church.
All right, so do we have any other comments or questions for Haley? Haley, what do you need from us? You talked about May 5th as.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're going to have to make a quick decision on May 5th. So I don't need anything else from you this evening, but I do want to let you know that on May 5th, there will be a public hearing and action that we're requesting, and we will get that proposal together as fast as we can, but you may not have a lot of time. So I would just, try to think about what's important to you with regards to this matter between then and now, so that at that time, y'all can figure out on the fly whether the proposal, it meets our basic obligations and anything that's important to us before we move it forward. So I do apologize that the timing of this is such that we can't have more robust conversation and dialogue with a proposal, but unfortunately that's the position the state has put us in.
All right, so we will look forward to seeing that next month. Any other things for Haley? All right, Haley, thank you so much for spending all this time with us this evening.
Thank you. It's nice to hear all your voices.
We are going to move on to the next item of the agenda. I'm going to welcome Paula Painter. And we have payment of bills, so we're going to move on to information only. Paula, you are going to talk to us about the budget.
What's left of it?
Okay, good afternoon. Sorry for the delay in that. I'm hoping right now that you guys are seeing a screen that is showing an update to the budget. Is that what you're seeing now, 2020 budget update?
Not yet.
Mine says June.
No.
All right, let me try sharing it one more time.
Oh,
Yes.
All right, you're seeing it now?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So good evening. This is Paula Painter, the Finance Director. I just wanted to give you a little bit of the update on the 2020 budget. When we entered 2020, none of us could have anticipated what we were going to be encountering, where we would have a disease that would spread so rapidly and that it would require some drastic measures to be put in place to keep everybody safe, including the stay-at-home order. And because of all of this, we're recognizing some economic consequences. And Bill Ellis did a nice job last week giving you some information on what the economic impacts have been to some of our businesses in the community. What I want to talk to you about is what are the potential impacts that this pandemic can be having on the city finances. Right now, we know economists are in consensus that we are going to have a recession. And what we don't know is how long this is going to last and how deep it's going to go. And there are all kinds of information out there and opinions on what this might look like. Right now, we're clearly in unprecedented times. In a 3-week period, we had almost 17 million people file for job loss claims. And if you look at the peak period of the Great Recession, the 2-year peak period of the Great Recession, we didn't even come close to that. So we're definitely in a time that we haven't encountered before. So as a leadership team, we have not been sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens. We've been doing a lot of footwork, trying to come up with some planning. And this has required us to kind of go back and look at how has the city been impacted in the past based on various things, including the Great Recession. We've looked at a variety of economic reports. We've consulted with our peer cities. So we have been doing a lot of footwork in the background, but the reality is we don't have a lot of information to go on. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. First, it's a lot of our revenue in our general fund is driven by taxes. And as you guys are really well aware, there's a lag between when businesses collect taxes and when the city actually receives them. So we began seeing a dip in the economy in March, and the March activity for sales tax, we typically would not see until the end of May. However, the Department of Revenue provided for businesses who asked an extension for to file those taxes to up to June 25th, which means the city, in the cases where businesses ask for the extension, would not see the revenue related till March or April until July 31st. That's going to make coming up with projections a little bit more difficult. But we can see what's going on in our community. We can look around and drive around and see the businesses that are closed. We can see that there truly are some significant impacts to our economy. So what we've had to do is put together our best educated guess on what this might look like. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through a little bit of the thought process behind this and some of the scenarios that we've looked at. So the first tab that I'm going to show you here is a look at the general fund's revenue history. So it is showing everything from 1999 till 2019. What you're going to find on this screen in the yellow section, so this would be rows 17 through 20, this is the time frame of the Great Recession. I had to do a little work with that area because at the time of the Great Recession, we were faced with a variety of things that were happening at once. Streamlined sales tax, annexation, Panther Lake, RFA, being created. So we had a lot of different things that are going on. But what I want to bring your attention to primarily is if you look at property tax, which is going to be your columns B and C, you're going to see that property tax, no matter what we face, has grown, with the exception of when the RFA was created and 1% of our levy rate went to the property, or went to the RFA. But where we were more significantly hit were in the areas of sales tax. You can see that over that time, we'd seen reductions in our sales tax numbers. Also, the next column over, you're going to see reductions in utility tax numbers, licenses and permits, and charges for services. So looking at that data, when we look at today, this kind of gives us a platform. What we're experiencing today is far more significant at the moment than what we experienced back with the Great Recession. Again, I'm saying at the moment because we don't know how long this will last. But you would anticipate that what we're looking at today, you would see some reductions in revenue, a bit more than what you're seeing on the screen here at the moment. So then what we ended up doing is using this data, we then began to create some assumptions. So I want to just walk through a couple of these assumptions with you. The first one is sales tax. Now with sales tax typically comes in 2 months lag. So for the month of January and February, we're actually receiving November and December activities. So we would anticipate between January and April, we should still be looking good because that's the revenue related to activity through the months of February. However, once we hit May, we know that we would typically see some reductions because that was the time that the social distancing was beginning to be in play. The economy was slowing down. People were not going out as much as they were before. So in this model here, I'm showing that for the month of May, based on our projected revenue, I would anticipate that we might see a 25% reduction in that revenue. With April, being the stay at home where we're seeing and other than essential businesses not being available to us, we're showing a potential of 50% reductions for April and May, which we would see typically in June and July. And then hopefully we'll begin to see as the economy is coming back that our losses are not going to be as significant. And so you can see I was looking at a 30%, 35%, 30%, and then 25% reductions. Now, this is comparing to what our revenue was from the prior year. So that's what the base is where were we at last year and what kind of reductions would we end up seeing. Another revenue I'd like to chat about is the B&O tax revenue. B&O tax revenue is a little bit more complicated because I have to look at it more on a quarterly basis. And on a quarterly basis, we know for first quarter that would be comprised of January, February, and March. We wouldn't expect to see as significant of a reduction for that quarter because things should have been fairly status quo for January and February, but we would see some for March. So what I'm doing is for the first quarter showing a potential loss of 15% for first quarter revenues, which tend to trickle in. They're due in April, but they do tend to trickle in for a few months. Second quarter taxes would be due in July. Second quarter, that's your April, May, June, and we are anticipating that we're going to still see some slowdown in that area. And so what's being reflected here is a 45% reduction in those revenues related to second quarter, and then 25% reductions in revenue for the last quarter of the year. That's similar to following the same model that I shared with you related to sales tax. This model isn't necessarily, this model is in line with what some of the other cities are looking at. Everyone is looking at their their potential losses from a different perspective, most of them looking at their biggest revenue streams and what could this potential impact be. But if we roll, I've done that assumptions for everything. And if we roll that data into this spreadsheet here that you're seeing, which is the March 2020 monthly financial report. One of the things that you're going to notice, I want to walk through a couple of them, is I've put, based on all of the taxes, based on the assumptions that were put into the system, it's going to adjust column J here with the estimated actual based on those assumptions. If those assumptions come to fruition, we would see a $7.2 million reduction just in our taxes. One of the things that's great, there's two columns here, K and L. This is showing you what is the variance between the actual and the 2020 budget. And then M and N are showing you what's the difference between the 2020 estimated actual and then the prior year. Where this has become significant is that you can see for our sales tax right here, our actuals for 2017 were 21 million, 2018, 24.7 million, and 2019 at 27.1. However, our budget is at $20.8 million. This, I believe, is really has turned out to be in the city's benefit because we were very conservative with the sales tax budget, which meant that when we put those projections in, we're actually looking compared to our budget at 11% potential reduction versus something much larger. One of the things that we know as well is that we are going to see reductions in our charges for services and our license and permits. As you can recall from the historical tab that I showed you, those ranged anywhere from 15% to 30%. And right now through the month of March, we are beginning to see some of those reductions where the potential for loss is in line with what we were seeing from the Great Recession. If we were to put in, let's see if I can get to the right column here, an assumption that those lines reduction of revenues just at 10%, this would be 9.2% would be loss in revenues that could potentially occur. It is more likely that we'll see larger drops in both licenses and permits as well as charges for services. Again, I say all of this, but again, these are really best educated guesses that we could be putting out here based on the information we have. If we were to do nothing in 2020, we would be using 9.1 million of our fund balance. With exception, oh, you will see there is where it says non-departmental, 3.2 million would be a reduced transfer out to capital projects, because if you recall, the B&O tax is based on what we get in that's broken out on how much goes to general fund versus capital street fund versus park. So this would be the reduction associated with that. So what departments have been asked to do? One of the things I did want to touch on real quick before I move past this is that the city has faced many hardships between the Great Recession, the fiscal cliff, that it's really understood the importance of maintaining a nice fund balance. And in fact, as we ended 2019, we had a $34 million fund balance. And you may recall that the city is focused on building up that fund balance, because each year we look at a $2 million structural imbalance. And so we have to be mindful of that as we're looking at this. But what our fund balance really does for us at this moment is it buys us time, a little bit of time, to evaluate some cost savings plans. And then recognizing that in order to save money, 80% of our budget is made up of staffing. So with when staffing reductions would be necessary, it would provide an opportunity to give those employees 30 days notice. And I really want to reiterate that the fund balance won't save us as we navigate this crisis. It really is just there. It's giving us an opportunity to make prudent decisions, to continue to focus on the city's long-term sustainability and general financial health. So department directors have been asked to go back to see where they can help to reduce budgets. And they were asked to look at, what things can you today stop doing? Is there something that is an easy save? And if so, let's begin saving those dollars now. And then they're to go back and look at their budgets to see if they can find cost savings, and look at that from a cost savings of anywhere from 5% to 20% of their budget. And then with those, be able to break those up into each of those tiers, because the reality is we don't know today what the city will have to look at in cost savings. So we really want to have departments prioritize their cost savings in groups of 5%. So 5, 10, 15, and 20%. And they're going to have to look at obviously general fund, and then anything that has either the same tax revenue source as the general fund, or who receives funding from the general fund. So that's going to include the street fund, criminal justice fund, facilities, fleet, IT, youth, teen, lodging tax. All of these funds will have to be looked at and determined, be prepared to make a decision on those. And one of the things that the ELT will be doing, the executive leadership team will be coming back together to talk about the proposed reductions to those expenditures. And then in addition, they're going to talk about capital. Capital is another area where some of their revenue sources are at risk. And so we're going to have a plan for prioritizing our capital projects. You may have heard the governor used his veto authority to discontinue the streamlined sales tax mitigation payments. We did, as a city, receive our March payment, and that was for about $887,000. And it's likely that the city will receive the June payment as well. But after that, they are not slated to receive any more payments. We did fund projects, as you may recall, through the mid-biennium budget adjustment. We funded about $6 million in projects, and those projects were funded between streamlined sales tax dollars and some of the capital resource fund balance. Right now, there is enough in fund balance to be able to cover those project amounts as they were authorized. And then once, as a leadership team, we're going to have to get back together to talk about those, because there are some funding sources for our capital that impacts multiple funds. So we're going to need to get back together so we can prioritize those projects citywide. We are definitely in some unprecedented times. Certainly, not what I anticipated to be looking at this point in 2020. Um, the general fund, the health of the general fund is kind of where we're first beginning to look, and this is what I'm sharing with you here today. We are monitoring the other funds as well, but I want to reiterate that we again don't know how long or how deep this recession is going to be, nor do we have hardly any information to be able to tell us what the impacts on our taxes are really going to be. And this is going to be essential as we are looking at our fund balance. We don't want to eat into that very much because we really don't know how deep we need to be going at this point in time. I've thrown a lot at you right now related to this. Do you guys have any questions of me?
Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, thank you very much, Paula. A couple of questions here. For the B&O tax, right? We have lots of ways how we slice that and how we collect that. So when you looked at that, did you look at that, how we collect that, or you just kind of did a generalization on what the impact's going to be?
So I looked at it both ways. So I'm going back to the B&O tax page. So I have two columns here. One of them is the projected column of the total B&O tax. And then this is the amount that will stay in the general fund. As I've said, at the moment, the primary focus has been on the general fund for this presentation. I do know that the reduction in transfers out between street and parks is approximately, let me go down here, a reduction of $3.2 million if this were to come true to this criteria. I do not have the breakout in front of me of how much of that would be related to parks versus streets.
Okay, that's good. Then my other question is, first of all, I want to make a comment. Thanks for the fund balance, right? That will give us some chance to breathe for a little bit before we have to make the hard decision. With the stimulus money, do we know yet from the federal level or the state level where they'll be getting stimulus money for cities?
At this point, the city doesn't meet the criteria to qualify for any of the stimulus packages that are out there. I know there's discussions about trying to get something for cities of our size or any smaller cities, but right now, most of what is out there is helping those whose populations are over 500,000. So we're not seeing the benefit of that. And I can't speak I can't predict the outcome of any work with the legislatures to try to get something for the cities of our size.
And I get that. I know we have to do what's in front of us today, right? And I understand that. So just a lot of tough decisions we're gonna have to make, and I get it. So thanks for sharing your presentation. Also, when you get through, can you send a copy of this presentation out to the council member, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Paula? Derek, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to just thank Paula very much. She has been working very hard over the last week or two to try to understand the impact of the COVID-19 recession on our budget. As directors make recommendations to the mayor's office and we start to make decisions about this, we'll keep council informed, and we've also committed to keep our employees informed too. We'll tell them as much as we can when we can tell them, and also there will be things that we just can't share right away, and if we can't, we'll just be transparent about the fact that we can't. But just as Paula said, this is an incredible challenge, larger magnitude than the Great Recession, happening faster than the Great Recession. So we have our work cut out for us for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula, for this presentation. You know, you mentioned there were some things some unknowns right now, but we certainly know that this is just a devastating effect to our budget and something we probably never expected to see at any time. So I know we'll be hearing back from you. Do you know when we will have some information from the departments
Well,
that you can share with council?
Well, we are going to meet as a leadership team the week of April 27th. And at that time, this is when department directors have an opportunity to share their proposed operating reductions. It's not our time that we're going to be talking about the capital portion. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to be able to process that. So we will have to get back to you at some point after that meeting.
Well, thank you. I know you've been working really hard on this. So anyone have any other questions or comments for Paula? All right, I think we are ready to move on. Thank you so much, Paula.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to the next presentation, which is information only, a parking code update from Rob Brown.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Very good. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Rob Brown. I am the Transportation Engineering Manager for Public Works. And this afternoon, I would like to discuss some proposed parking code modifications with the council and get your feedback on your feelings on these. Next, so until my slides pop up. Kim, did you want me to share my screen? Okay, thank you. Okay. Very good. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just a quick overview on parking. There are a couple different types of parking restrictions. There are general parking restrictions that apply everywhere. Those are codified in state law and also in the city code. They apply to all the public streets. And some of those are listed on the slides, and these are the ones that we know: no parking in intersections, stop signs, crosswalks, those kind of things. And there are other types of parking restrictions on public streets that are specific to the city of Kent, and those are written in the city code in chapter 9.38. These include things like no parking zones, time limited parking, which are 2 and 4 hour parking, loading zones, specific things that apply to Kent, such as large trucks or RVs parked on the streets and things like that. This afternoon, I'd like to discuss 2 proposed parking restrictions, or 2 different categories, excuse me. The first being narrow streets and the second being nuisance parking. These are high-level looks, and if the council supports these locations, then we will do some specific engineering and bring these back for further consideration. As I go through the presentation, each location I'll show a map of the city to identify where that location is, and then follow that up with an aerial photo that shows this specific neighborhood or the specific location that we're talking about. You'll see as we go forward that the parking restrictions are color-coded, that the red lines will show the streets or the areas we're proposing for no parking on either side of the street, and that orange lines will show parking on one side of the streets. Before we move on from the slide, I do want to point out that the picture in the lower right corner, that's actually a federal police officer, not a City of Kent police officer parked there. So, next slide, please. Thank you. Narrow public streets. So the Kent Design and Construction Standards list the minimum required street width for parking. This is based on the Fire Code and Kent City Code, Chapter 13, which requires 20 feet of unobstructed width for fire apparatus access, as well as 26 feet of roadway width for 20 feet on either side of a fire hydrant for fire hydrant access. The city design standards require between 28, or let me start with up to 28 feet is no parking. So between 20 and 28 feet would be no parking. 28 feet to 32 feet would be parking on one side of the street, and anything more than 32 feet would be parking on both sides of the street. And again, we have the fire hydrant restrictions. The locations we're going to discuss this afternoon were brought to us by the Police Department, Puget Sound Regional Fire, or the neighborhoods themselves. And all of the proposed parking restrictions that we're going to discuss have been discussed with the police and the fire department, and they both support all of these that I'm about to present you. So the first location, as you can see on the screen, is called Midori Meadows. This is located in the northeast part of the city. This came to us from the residents that live in the neighborhood, and it came through our friends in Economic and Community Development. Next slide, please. So here on the right is an aerial photo of the location, just off of 132nd Avenue Southeast and just south of Southeast 218th Street. This was built in 2016, and this is one of, if not the last development that was built in the city of Kent that was permitted by King County before the Panther Lake annexation. The street is 24 feet wide, and so it doesn't meet the 28-foot requirement for parking on one side of the street, and so we are proposing parking on both sides of the street. Interesting note, when I brought this to the fire marshal to get his opinion on it, he said he was aware of it, and he specifically asked for this street to be posted no parking on both sides. So does anybody have any questions or comment on this location?
This is Councilmember Larmer. I do. So this is actually right, one of the entryways to my neighborhood, so I know it very well. So I just want to be clear. So it was permitted with the narrower streets prior to the annexation. So even though it wasn't built till 2016, it was permitted when it was still King County, and they allowed narrower streets. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
This was permitted under King County, and then when we annexed Panther Lake, we assumed all of the permits that they approved.
Okay, and so you said that their streets are our requirements are 28 feet wide.
Correct. We require 28 feet wide for parking on one side of the street.
On one side. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right. Okay, next slide, please. The next neighborhood is called Villa Real. This is east of 108th Avenue, also known as Benson or State Route 515, between 200th Street and 204th Streets. This is one of the neighborhoods that the city's homeowners association approached us about narrow streets and their concerns about emergency access. Next slide, please. Again, aerial photo on the right side, you can see the neighborhood is outlined in the purple lines. And on the left side, a couple pictures of the different areas of the neighborhood that have the narrow streets. And this is another neighborhood. Villa Real was built in King County before it was annexed into the city. So this is part of the Panther Lake annexation. The main street through the development is 111th Place Southeast. It's 28 feet wide, and you can see that on the map. It's in the orange dashed line. The other streets in the neighborhood are shown in red lines. Those are all 24 feet wide, so they don't meet our 28-foot requirement for parking on one side of the streets. We discussed, again, these with the police department and fire marshal's office, and they both support the parking restrictions. But one interesting thing, when the fire marshal's office went out to evaluate this area and measure the streets, they also noted that Southeast 200th Street and Southeast 204th Street are less than 28 feet wide, and asked us to restrict parking on those streets as well. And so you can see those at the top and the bottom of the map with the red lines. Any questions or comments about this location? Okay, next slide, please. Two neighborhoods side by side. This is the Ridge at Panther Lake and Plateau at Panther Lake. These are the north end of the city on the east side. They are roughly between 192nd Street and 196th Street. These two separate neighborhoods I'd like to discuss together because not only did the two neighborhoods approach us together, but they're also adjacent. So next slide, please. The aerial photo with the lines on it is a little bit complicated, so we'll talk our way through that. Again, another location that was built in King County as part of the Panther Lake annexation area. The two neighborhoods you can see right and left side, the Plateau at Panther Lake is in purple on the right side, and the Ridge at Panther Lake is in green on the left side. There are two streets that have street width of 28 feet. That's 113th Place South That's in the lower left corner of the photo, and Southeast 196th Street, that's in the middle that runs east-west. The rest of the streets in these two neighborhoods are 24 feet wide. Again, as I mentioned, actually the homeowners association for both neighborhoods approached us at the same time, again, with concerns about emergency vehicle access. So I do want to point out the picture in the upper left, that's Southeast 113th Avenue, or sorry, 113th Avenue Southeast, looking north. The street is 24 feet wide, and parking on both sides of the street. When I drove through this, there's about 11 feet between the cars on either side of the road in those locations with our parking side by side. Probably wide enough for a fire truck to squeeze through, but certainly wasn't certainly not wide enough for two cars to go through at the same time. Does anybody have any questions or comments about this neighborhood? I know there was a lot to look at here on the map with the different streets and the different neighborhoods. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Next location we're going to look at is 133rd Avenue Southeast, between Southeast 224th Street and Southeast 224th Place. This is also in the Cramp Lake annexation area, and this location was built prior to the annexation. And this came to us as a request from the police department. Next slide, please. This is just a very short segment of street. If you're looking at the aerial photo, to the west is 132nd Avenue Southeast, and north of this area is Sunrise Elementary School. And this is just a very short segment between Southeast 224th Street and Southeast 224th Place. The police department has noted people parking on the inside of that curve. They're in the middle of the screen, and asked us to restrict parking on the west side of the street in that short segment. The street is 28 feet wide, so we would allow parking on the east side of the street. Any questions or comments? All right, next slide, please. Our next location is Southeast 220th Street between 102nd Place Southeast and 103rd Place Southeast. Both the fire department and the police department asked us to restrict parking on this street. Next slide, please. This is a short segment. As you can see in the aerial photo on the right side, on the left side are pictures from both ends of the proposed parking restrictions. The paved section of the street is 20 feet wide, which just meets the minimum requirements in our city code for fire access, and meets code for a drivable street, but doesn't meet code for parking. And so we are proposing no parking on both sides of the street in this segment of Southeast 220th Streets. Any questions or comments? Okay, next slide, please. Our next location is Southeast 220th Street from 88th Avenue to the east end. This came to us from the police department. Next slide, please. And you'll see from the aerial photo where we are here is we are to the east side of Central. 88th Avenue South is the North South Street, and then this is a segment from 88th Avenue South to the Berkeley Heights apartment complex. This street is actually signed no parking, but it's not in the city code. The pavement is 28 feet wide, but it is signed, or excuse me, it is marked with center lines and shoulders. So there isn't actually enough room for parking on either side of the roadway. So we are proposing this to be no parking through this section of the street. Questions or comments? Okay, very good. Next slide, please. Our next location is Southeast 243rd Street and 93rd Court South. This was one that the police department asked us to look at. Next slide, please. This is a newer development that has no parking signs posted, but the no parking or the parking restrictions have not been put into the city code. And so these two streets here are 28 feet wide, and we are proposing to allow parking on one side, restrict parking on the other side. Again, this was a recent development. It has the signs. We are just want to put those restrictions into the city code. Any questions or comments? Okay, next slide, please. Our next category is nuisance parking. These are places where we we're requesting to restrict parking to minimize the undesirable criminal activities. These came to us from our police department. Next slide, please. Our first location in this category is 3rd Avenue South from the 800 block to South 259th Street. Next slide, please. Now, this is the industrial section of 3rd Avenue South, just beginning at the south end of the residential area and extending down to South 259th Street. The concerns with this area are overnight parking and litter. The roadway in this area varies between 22 feet and 36 feet. It does have striped center lines and edge lines, and there are no paved shoulders for parking. This is an industrial area, and through the vast majority of our industrial area to the north in the valley, we don't allow parking, and so we are requesting this to be made no parking, again, for the concerns over overnight parking and litter. Any questions? All right, very good. And our last location, 25th Avenue South, between 260th and the end of the street. This is over in the southwest corner of the city, just off of 260th. And this came to us as a request from the police department. Next slide, please. This is 25th Avenue South is a dead-end street from South 260th. Again, the concerns are overnight parking and littering. At the north end of the street, which you can see the red dashed line, the street's wide enough to support parking. And so in this section, we are proposing no parking between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. to match other locations in the city. And then the solid red line south of that, the street is 20 feet wide. And so we are proposing no parking in that section of the street. Any questions or comments? Okay, that was the last one. Are there any questions or comments overall, please?
Anybody have anything for Rob? Councilmember Kaur.
Thank you, Rob. Just a quick question. So what is the process of letting these, I know we send letters, but is there any other way to let these residents know and get them involved in the conversation so they're aware this is coming? Because it can be, I know that from personal experience, it can be problematic trying to figure out where to park and near, or what's going on in your neighborhood and you're so confused. So what are we doing to raise awareness on this?
So the 4 neighborhoods that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, 3 of them we have met with their homeowners associations. So Villa Real, which is the one near Benson, and then the Plateau and the Ridge at Panther Lake, which is at the north end of the city. We've met with our homeowners associations. They're the ones that actually brought these to us. We talked about the process and what that would be. Specific to Villa Real, that one I actually went to their HOA meeting where all the neighbors get together once a year to talk about all the things of interest, and I talked about the parking concerns and the proposed parking restrictions with them. So going forward, what we'd probably do is, again, we do those letters, we would reach out through the homeowners associations and their communications methods, their email lists, their newsletters, things like that, to try and get that information out there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larmer. Councilmember Larmer, did you have a comment?
I'm sorry, I was talking on mute. So when I first joined council a couple of years ago, we had a similar presentation on narrow streets and had to do some signage and restrictions. And so it seems like this is a recurring theme with these properties that came to us from annexation from King County. Was there anything in those annex packages, or is there any recourse that, we're now paying for the signage and putting the effort and labor in just to do the notification and the signage in these neighborhoods? No, when I don't want it wasn't really our fault, or it wasn't our codes, our standards. This is something we inherited. Is were we ever I guess compensated from King County, or it just feels like we're paying every couple of years this comes up and we have to deal with it when it wasn't even our standards.
Rob, would you like me to speak to that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Larimer and Council President. May I respond to the council member's question?
Yes, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember. That is an excellent question, and I can tell you that we have not yet paid for problems that we inherited as a result of the Meridian annexation, which is right around 2000. So in the last 25 years, we have, following Growth Management Act, we've annexed a number of different areas, both on the West Hill and the East Hill. And unfortunately, there is no mechanism that we have to go back to King County and say, hey, look what you did to us. The annexation was partially up to us because our councils voted to accept the annexations at the time. We did, at the time of the annexations, we did review what we were getting, and it's kind of like, getting somebody's old car or something. I mean, we knew what we were getting. In the Panther Lake annexation, I think a couple of the council members may recall, we were pretty incensed because the King County actually offered some mitigation money to us, which they later withdrew at the beginning of the Great Recession. And that really stung badly. But we were also concerned not only with the parking problems, but the condition of the pavement. And so because of the age of some of these things and the different standards that the county has, we've really have had no recourse other than to complain back to King County. I've tried embarrassment, all kinds of different techniques, but we've got what we've got. And unfortunately, we're not aware of any legal recourse or even a political recourse for that matter. So I hope that answers your question. But I can tell you that we did do quite a bit of analysis, particularly, for example, with the Panther Lake annexation. And we did know what we were getting at the time. Of course, we also got some mitigation money from the state, as you probably recall, or may recall. So that was intended to offset it. I hope that answers some of your question.
It does. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Any other questions for Rob? All right. Did you need anything from us, Rob? It looks like this was information only.
That's correct. What we'll do is we'll go back and do some engineering, put together some cost estimates, and then we'll bring these back for your consideration.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Let's move on. I'd like to welcome Eric Connor to talk about 2020 construction update. Do we have Eric on the call?
Are we on now? Okay, sorry, we were muted on our connection. I'll start over. So I'm Eric Connor. I'm the construction engineering manager, Public Works. Tonight I wanted to talk about some of the upcoming construction projects that'll be impacting the normal traffic flow of this coming construction season. So on the next slide, we have a map of the city. It's highlighting several of the projects that we have going on in town this year. The yellow ones that you'll see on there are the 228th grade separation. That's an ongoing project. 76th Avenue, that's something coming up. 4th and Willis roundabout, Meet Me on Meeker. One we don't have on there that's going to be a pretty good impact is the final phase of Upper Mill Creek Dam. We had a closure on 104th Avenue last year to do the first half of that construction. We're going to have the same closure implemented again this year on 104th. The blue and green markings you see on the map is the locations of this year's 2020 overlay projects. The green ones are the overlay and ADA ramp replacement sites, and the blue ones are the just ADA curb replacement sites. So drilling down into some of the projects here, on the next page, South 228th, the Union Pacific Railroad grade separation project. That project has been going on for some time now. It's in its 5th phase of construction. The road has been closed for the last few phases here. Work is ongoing. It'll continue through the winter. You guys have seen that road closure in addition to intermittent closures of interurban trail. Like I said, we're going to be setting girders over the trail and over the railroad here, hopefully it come June, and have the road opened up with substantial completion this winter. Next page is our Meet Me on Meeker project. It's in front of the Riverbend driving range. This project is just getting underway here in the last couple weeks here. This job will primarily work under open traffic. However, we do have a couple weekend closures that are going to enable the construction of a new elevated crosswalk similar to what's constructed on Ethos. We anticipate this project being completed this summer. Next one is the 4th and Willis Roundabout. I'm actually very excited to build this one. This project was bid in March. Should go to council for authorization to award in May. If that's the case, we'll probably get going and construction in June. Work will continue through this winter. Depending on when we finish, we may be doing the final lift of paving in this job the following spring. This job will also have a couple weekend closures that'll allow us to transition from a signalized intersection to the roundabout configuration that'll be similar to the final product. 76th Avenue improvements. This project was just advertised today. We're hoping to proceed with construction on this project in June. When complete, this project will have a new concrete roadway raised to an elevation that will take care of the flooding in front of Blue Origin. We will not be implementing any closures on this project. However, there will be significant traffic impacts and delays. The contractor will be required to maintain one lane of traffic in each direction on that road. So, and then, yeah, the final slide was a photo of one of the major goals that this project is trying to accomplish, taking care of that flooding on 76th Avenue we see nearly every winter. So that's what I have for now. Thank you for moving the slides along, Kim, and sorry about being muted when we got going.
Thank you so much, Eric. Does anyone have any comments or questions? All right, thank you so much. It looks like we'll move on in the agenda to the Mill Creek Reestablishment Mitigation Property Purchase. So Cheryl Rolsick-Wilcox is going to join us.
Yes, hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm here to talk to you about another property acquisition and to ask that you, at the council meeting, authorize the mayor to sign the documents needed to acquire 3 parcels that are all located on Freger Road from the Matalich family. And the amount we're looking to pay is $280,000 for all 3 parcels. The property owner approached the city to sell these parcels, which are zoned for single-family residential development, and total 488,760 square feet in vacant land. The city is purchasing the property at fair market value, which was determined by our appraiser and confirmed by our review appraiser as well. This acquisition is going to be used as mitigation property for the Mill Creek Reestablishment project. And the money for this purchase will come from the project budget, which is funded through the Stormwater Utility Fund. The goals of the Mill Creek Reestablishment project are to reduce flood risks, improve water quality, and enhance fish passage and habitats. This purchase will provide mitigation for wetlands that are proposed to be impacted by the project. That's it. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Cheryl? All right, thank you for the presentation. Is everyone okay moving this forward to the consent agenda? Do I have anyone who doesn't want to move this forward? All right, looks like we're good to go. Thank you, Cheryl.
Great, thank you all.
All right, Mark Hallett's going to join us and talk about a partnering between the city service agreement test. Well, I'm going to let you explain this. Sound Transit on that facility.
Thank you, Council President, council members. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So what I have before you tonight are two agreements for the Sound Transit Operation and Maintenance Facility. These agreements are between the City of Kent and the Sound Transit. And it looks like there's three agreements, but the first one is called a Partnering in City Services Agreement. And then the second agreement is called Task Order Number 1. Well, you're on page 67 of your agenda packet. So next slide, please. Now, Kelly Peterson came to you last Tuesday night at Council Workshop and gave you an overview and an update on the Federal Way Link extension, which is the left map you see there. And just a quick overview, the Angle Lake, starting at Angle Lake and moving southward, the Federal Way Link extension will add about 7.8 miles of new rail line, and it's scheduled to be completed in 2024. The map on the right is the Tacoma Dome Link extension, and that'll add another 10 miles, extending from Federal Way Transit Center all the way down into a new station being constructed down near the Tacoma Dome. And this part will be in place, anticipated in 2030. And the reason I mention these two projects is because a component of these two projects is an operation and maintenance facility. If you go to the next slide, there you go. This is an aerial view of the existing operation maintenance facility in Seattle. Skitcha lined up there on the right is I-5. And then the next road to the left is Airport Way. And this is just north of Spokane Street. So this kind of gives you an idea of what an operation maintenance facility looks like. It has parking for the workers there as well as parking for the trains. And so you can see it's a pretty big site. I'll point out also that Sound Transit is currently constructing another operation and maintenance facility in Bellevue. And then they're still looking in the future of building another one, a fourth one up in the north end. So moving to the next slide. The features of the operation maintenance facility that they're going to be building down in this area is that it will serve eventually 144 light rail vehicles. I'll point out that that will be for both the Federal Way Link extension and the Tacoma Dome Link extension. So the 144 will be the ultimate build out. What happens is they bring the trains here at night to get washed and serviced and fixed up, and then they're put back out onto the street, onto the rails the next morning to begin service again. The facility also has storage tracks for the trains as well as for other spare parts and administrative facilities such as that. And Sound Transit's estimating right now that it'll have 470 full-time employees. Of course, that'll be ramped up over time as well once the both of the projects are put into place. This is a 24/7 year-round operation, and I'll point out that a majority of the work happens in the middle of the night. As I mentioned, the trains come in at the end of the service day and then are fixed up and put back out onto the rails the next morning. So the next slide, please. This shows the three potential sites that Sound Transit is studying as part of their draft EIS for the location of this operation and maintenance facility. They started with 24 sites a couple of years ago, and those sites were from Kent all the way down into Tacoma. And then about a year ago, they whittled the list down to the three that you see here. Two of those sites are located in Federal Way. Those are the two orange dots at the bottom, near the bottom of the map there. And they're both located just south of 336th Street, near the Christian Faith Center, just west of Interstate 5. And it's really right across from the old Weyerhaeuser headquarters complex, so right across I-5 from there. The third potential site that Sound Transit is studying is the one that we're here to talk about, and that's the Midway landfill site. If you move on to the next slide, this is an aerial photograph showing the site as it is. It's a 70-acre site, and just to get you oriented, I-5 is there on the right. North is at the top of the slide there, and then Pack Highway is on your left. I mentioned it is a 70-acre site. Sound Transit doesn't need all of that, and of course, all of it's not usable, but it's quite adequate to serve as an operation and maintenance facility. Little history, it was a gravel pit between 1945 and 1968. So they dug a big hole in the ground, and at that time in '68, they decided that'd be a good place to put garbage. So between '68 and '83, they used it as a landfill. And after that, they eventually capped it, added a gas extracting system, and then in 1986, it became a Superfund site. And Seattle Public Utilities, the owner of the property, has been monitoring it ever since. And on the right there, you can see the yellow line that is the future guideway that will be coming, the mainline track that'll be running from Kent down into Federal Way. And then the blue line is part of WashDOT's SR 509 project. So moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This slide shows a little sketch kind of overlaid onto the site there. This is just again for illustrative purposes. It's not really preliminary design or anything, but this site has challenges. Actually, all three sites have challenges. There's no perfect location to put this facility, but particular to this site, there is contaminated soil out there. It is a Superfund site. There are also settlement issues, so they can't just build on top of this fill because it would settle. And if they select this site, there's a lot of regulatory coordination between Sound Transit, Seattle Public Utilities, and the Department of Ecology. Sound Transit has already started discussions with the regulating agencies to talk about the options of this site. So moving on to the next slide, please. Oh, back up one, please. Thank you. So the first agreement before you tonight, which is on page 69 of your packet, is the Partnering in City Services Agreement. And this is very similar to the way Sound Transit has done the work for the Federal Way Link extension. They have a blanket agreement, overarching agreement, and then under that, they execute task orders to get particular work executed. And that's very similar to what they're doing here. So the first agreement is called the Partnering in City Services Agreement, and that basically lays out the roles and responsibilities between the City of Kent and Sound Transit. It spells out that we'll all work together in administrating this project in a good faith effort. It also spells out that the City of Kent and Sound Transit will work together as far as communicating and public engagement, as well as participating in meetings that we have. And it also sets up a process, as I mentioned, for future task orders. And again, this is very similar to the process that they use on the Federal Way Link Extension project. So task order 1, the second agreement that is before you tonight, which is on page 91 of your packet, is task order 1. And what task order 1 basically is, it's a mechanism for Sound Transit to reimburse us for up to $251,486 for what you see there: reimbursement for coordinating and communicating with them, reimbursement for attending the meetings, as well as reviewing the draft environmental impact statement and other documents associated with their plans for the Midway landfill site and the other sites as well. And also setting up a preliminary permitting plan and then participating in public outreach efforts. And I will add that this task order 1 is really only up to where they make the selection of the site. So if the Midway landfill site is selected, we'll execute future task orders to encompass any permitting that needs to be done at that time. If the Midway landfill site's not selected, we may or may not have to execute a second task order. I'm not sure at this time how that would end up. But moving on to the next slide, please. So where are we at? Right now, Sound Transit is conducting studies for their draft environmental impact statement. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted that a little bit, but they're still aiming to get the draft EIS issued in the fall of this year. In fact, just this week, we scheduled Sound Transit staff to come to the second workshop in September to give an update and to present to you the results of that draft EIS. The final EIS is then scheduled to be issued at the end of 2021. And then the Federal Way Link extension, that plans on being online in 2024. The design of and construction of the operation maintenance facility will start in 2021 and then end in 2026. You'll see that there's a 2-year gap in there between the completion of the Federal Way Link extension and the completion of the operation and maintenance facility. During those 2 years, the trains that are run on this line will go up to that Seattle, to the photo you saw earlier, will go up there to be serviced. And then again, you can see there, the Tacoma Dome Link extension is scheduled to come online in 2030. And that's when we'll be ramping up to those 144 trains and the full usage of that site with employees up to the maximum number of employees that Sound Transit expects. Approximate cost, this is a very expensive project, 800 million up to 1.3 billion, depending on the site they select and the construction methods they select. So go to the last slide, please. So that's it before you tonight. We are asking for approval to move on to the council, these two agreements. I'll just add one thing is that Sound Transit has offered tours to go through this facility, and we're pretty certain that they would.
Okay. Now I'm back.
All right, I think we lost you, Mark, for a minute. I think you were talking about them offering up tours for us, but so looking ahead, is everyone okay moving this forward to the consent agenda, or do I have anybody who is opposed to moving this forward?
Okay with me.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
So am I back now?
You are back.
Sorry, I guess my ear things must have run out of battery. So the last slide, all I want to mention there is that I'm available to answer any questions, and that Sound Transit is willing to give tours of this site if you'd like. The only caveat is that the tours would be in the middle of the night when all of the activity would be happening. So just want to point that out. So I'm available to answer questions. Also have Kelly Peterson on the line that might be able to answer any questions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Mark? Or comments? All right, and I think we all agreed this is okay to move forward. No objections?
Yep.
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you.
And we are going to move on to Derek Matheson to talk about a procurement report, information only.
All right, thank you, Madam President. So last December, the council updated the city's procurement code, and among the other changes, it increased the mayor's signature authority for contracts from $65,000 to $100,000, changed the authority for amendments from $130,000 to $200,000, and then also created new authority for the contracts with temporary staffing firms for up to 18 months and a value of $200,000 or less. When the council adopted that ordinance, it asked for a report after the first quarter of 2020, just to see an example of types of contracts between the mayor's old signature authority and new signature authority. And in the first quarter of this year, the mayor only signed one contract that was between the old and the new, and that was a grant agreement with the state of Washington for just under $80,000 that is provided for our Census 2020 temporary outreach workers. So that is all I have.
Thank you, Derek. Does anyone have any questions for Derek? All right. Well, we have come to the end of our meeting. I want to thank everyone for all this great conversation and thank the public for joining us. And we are adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
The police department to clean up a corner there. So my question is this a responsibility true of all police departments across King County?
Great question. Let me back